All right. How media outlets and campaign ads portray their candidates and opponents. A presentation done by Paul's Y321 Group 4, consisting of Benjamin Dunning, Pauline Hall, and Katie Kilburn, and Jacob Sputich. While looking at how media outlets and campaign ads portray candidates and opponents, we focused on two highly covered Senate races from the 2022 midterm election. We looked at Georgia's Senate race between Republican Herschel Walker and Democrat Raphael Warnock. And we also looked at Pennsylvania's Senate race between Republican Mehmet Oz and Democrat John Fetterman. Throughout the presentation, we will lay out hypotheses, then we will dive into how we set up the study. We will elaborate on each candidate along with the media outlets and campaign ads used. At the end, we will make sense of our findings and compare it to material we've gone over in Pulse Y321.
To begin introducing our sources, we use the Image is Everything reading by Iyengar. Iyengar discusses how each candidate will do everything in their power to keep their image of themselves as perfect as they can. They will strive to make their image appear as they desire it to be, which will then influence the rest of their race. Our second reading is What's Love Got to Do with It? Emotion, Rationality, and Framing LGBT Rights by Harrison and Mickelson. The main takeaways from this reading is that emotions play a huge role in swaying public opinion on issues, which was done through their studies on gay marriage opinions through different stimuli. Both of these readings appear to be perfect ones for us to reference because of the nature of what we're studying. Advertisements and news articles will clearly reference emotions and images. Therefore, these are two readings that make perfect sense for us to use.
Our third reading is by Swire Thompson FL. This reading draws on the likelihood of voters to remain in support of candidates, even if they know they have lied.
It suggests that support of particular candidates is often related to party loyalty and a feeling of affiliation rather than specific individuals or policies. This highlights themes of party loyalty and utilising voters' emotions, which we will seek to measure in our sources. The final reading that has influenced the project is Don't Worry, Be Trusting by Albertson and Guderian, which highlights how negative emotions such as anxiety in voters can affect who they support. The need for trust is generated through who voters consider the best party or candidate to deal with perceived threats that they have already received raised anxiety about. This reading found that where issues are partisan, increased anxiety led to increased favour for parties that dealt with the issue more strongly.
We made the hypothesis that candidates use strategies to raise emotions of fear and anxiety when discussing the opposition in order to raise support themselves. With this hypothesis, we selected 4 candidates from 2022 Pennsylvania and 2022 Georgia Senate elections to see if our hypothesis is correct. We each selected a liberal, moderate, and conservative news article or campaign ads for each candidate.
Our expected findings start with the fact that we expect both party candidates and outlets to use emotions as an effective tool for appealing to the public. This is related to the increased success in raising support for same-sex marriage that Harrison and Michelson found in their study of emotional appeals compared to rational appeals. Secondly, we expect the way candidates talk about their opponents to be a strategy in order to gain support for themselves as the better option. This reflects Iyengar's paper that stresses how political officials will use media sources as an opportunity to create an image of themselves that is preferable to opposition candidates. We also expect the way in which they look for this support is by appealing to their own ability to be trusted according to specific policies or appealing to general patriotism. Candidates may highlight the policies in which they would be most effective at protecting anxious voters from perceived threats. We also expect to find that Republicans are more likely than Democrats to show this strategy of emotional appeals to fear in order to gain support for themselves. Albertson and Guderian's findings showed increased support for Republicans on the partisan issue of immigration. It seems likely that Republicans would stress their ideology when it comes to protecting American people from threats they might have fears about. Finally, we expect to see prominent themes of party loyalty from both parties, encouraging the tendency in voters to look favourably on candidates they are already affiliated with. This matches the prevalence of party loyalty found by Swire Thompson et al., both in overlooking negatives about one's own party and seeking negatives about the opposition.
The setup of our study depended on each of us four choosing a candidate and selecting sources about them. One moderate source, one liberal source, and then one conservative source. We then tried to have one source that corresponds with their party affiliation to be an advertisement in their favor that was run on TV. We would then code and analyze each source for different emotions, topics, and imagery to see if these sources would line up with our expected findings based on our class readings that we participated in.
Harrison and Michelson say that video would be more effective than text in raising public emotions because the video with emotional framing reflects the means of communication. Based on Harrison and Michelson's reading, we expected both party candidates and outlets to use emotions to appeal to the public. We see if each candidate's campaign video or article about them incited emotions and evaluated how much they incited the emotions based on a range of 1 to 5. As we see the average of each candidate for Oz and Fetterman, the campaign videos incited more emotions than the news article. As for Volker, the collected resources about him were all video, but we found that most of his video was rated higher than the news articles of other candidates. For Warnock, the average data was pretty different from what we expected, which was that his campaign video would be rated higher than the news article. However, the news article about him was rated higher than his campaign video about people reacting negatively to Herschel Walker's speech.
The Iyengar reading stresses that candidates will do whatever they can to keep their image however they desire to be. This is apparent in all of our candidate ads because each candidate is strictly making themselves out to be a member of their party that is passionate about their beliefs. This is seen very clearly by the amount of times candidates are seen mentioning the opposite party. The opposite party is consistently mentioned by all members of both races in an attempt to distinguish who they are as people and candidates. This goes along exactly how Iyengar says candidates will portray themselves, so there's no surprise there. Each candidate also has a few other individual characteristics that contribute to their image. Dr. Oz being a doctor, Walker being a hardworking and dedicated person, and Warnock being a pastor and a man of God. Other media articles also play on this, but not as much as the specific ads. Articles that are partisan have tended to draw on a candidate's image much more, while the moderate ones have stayed out of the image discussion for the most part. This graph shows the candidates and you could.
We then turn to see how candidates try and reflect their own trustworthiness in terms of gaining support, either through appealing to specific policies or patriotism. This graph shows the candidates and their relative appeals to patriotism for either the Democrats or the Republican candidates. The fact that the candidate almost always only raises the topic of patriotism for their own party, which you can see by the large disparity between the two lines, means that both parties are using patriotism as a means by which to present themselves in a good patriotic image, and specifically their opposition as the opposite. This graph then shows the relationship between the sources mentioning policy and mentioning the opposition party. The results show that there is a moderate correlation between the two, which could be seen as evidence that candidates want to approach the issue of policy in order to raise anxiety and suggest that they are a more reliable solution than the opposition. Finally, this graph measures the use of appealing to fear and imagery in order to raise emotions in voters. Both imagery and fear are similarly used across all sources, seen by the little disparity between the lines. Regarding our expected findings, there actually isn't a strong indication that Republicans are more likely than Democrats to employ emotional appeals to fear. In fact, you can see that Democratic candidates such as John Fetterman may even be more likely to use emotional appeals to fear.
This graph Sorry. We expect to see prominent themes of party loyalty from both parties, encouraging the tendency in voters to look favorably on candidates they are already affiliated with. And that is what is presented in They Might Be a Liar, But They're My Liar by Swire Thompson et al. Where the graph shows peaks is where we found high amounts of loyalty with candidates and their own release campaign ads. Where the graph drops off in the zeros are all the ones where where the graph peaks, we found high amounts of loyalty in candidates and therefore their own release campaign ads. Every one candidate showed that except for Warnock's. Where the graph falls off is where we find zero loyalty when it was a source of an opposite political leaning and when it went against the candidate. That is where the graph goes at zero.
We could observe 4 takeaways from our project. We realized that both parties' candidates mentioned the other party to maintain their own image. They try to align positive image that reflect on themselves and their party and distance themselves from negative images associated with the opposition. Both parties show evidence of appealing to policy to present themselves as reliable and better options compared to their opponents. They also try to gain trust by raising their feelings of fear. Strong party loyalty is evident for campaign ads and low evidence for party loyalty from sources that had a political leaning opposite to the candidate. The campaign videos seem to incite more emotions based on the average than the articles for all candidates except Warnock.
Using all sides in PolitiFact, we fact-checked CNN's article on Oz's awful answer on abortion during the 2022 Senate debate, as well as Politico's coverage on Fetterman's rocky night from that same debate. We also looked into Politico's coverage on Warnock's use of campaign funds to fight a personal lawsuit. All were checked and all were fact-checked.
And then these are our works cited. It's this page, and this one. Thank you guys for listening.
Yeah.